The laughter in the room was so loud it felt like a physical blow. My parents, with my sister beaming right beside them, had just announced she was inheriting their entire $10 million fortune. Then they looked at me, their cast-off son, and just laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound that echoed how they'd treated me my entire life. It bounced off the polished mahogany walls of the lawyer's office, a room that suddenly felt like a tomb. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that I was clutching a letter from my grandfather. A letter that was about to blow a lifetime of their lies wide open and change everything. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the smell of old paper, lemon polish, and the sickly sweet perfume my mother always wore. It was a smell I'd always associated with disappointment. My father, Richard, sat with his leg crossed, the perfect picture of smug satisfaction. My mother, Alina, had a tight, victorious smile plastered on her face, her eyes glittering. And between them sat my sister, Vanessa. Perfect, golden Vanessa. She looked every inch the heiress in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my rent for a year. She just radiated this serene confidence, the kind you only get when your whole life has been gift-wrapped for you. I, on the other hand, felt like a ghost at the party. I was the odd one out, the black-and-white character in their vibrant, colorful world. My suit was off the rack, my tie was a little crooked, and my stomach was twisted in knots. I knew this wasn't going to be a happy family reunion. We weren't a happy family, but even I wasn't ready for how cruel they were about to be. Mr. Thorne, a lawyer whose face seemed permanently stuck in a look of mild disapproval, cleared his throat. "As you know," he started, his voice a dry rustle, "we are here to execute the preliminary dispersal of Richard and Alina's living trust." He droned on about legal clauses and tax stuff, his words just a meaningless buzz in my ears. I wasn't listening. I was watching my family, the quick, knowing looks they shot each other, the tiny, secret smiles. They were a closed circle, a fortress I'd never been allowed inside. It had always been this way. I remembered all of it. Vanessa's school projects were always family affairs, spread out on the dining room table with my parents hovering, offering all their attention and resources. My projects were lonely tasks I finished late at night in my room. For her birthdays, she got lavish parties with ponies and magicians. Mine were quiet dinners where the main topic was usually one of Vanessa's latest accomplishments. When I won a scholarship to a state university, they barely blinked. "That's practical, Alex," my father had said, before immediately asking about the Ivy League school Vanessa was looking at. Their love was like money, and Vanessa always had all of it. "And so," Mr. Thorne said, yanking me back to the present, "we come to the primary beneficiary." He paused, looking over his glasses at my parents. My father gave him a short nod. "Because she's always been so dedicated to this family and understands our values," my mother announced, her voice dripping with fake emotion. "Richard and I have decided that the entire trust, valued at $10 million, will pass directly to our daughter, Vanessa." The words just hung there in the air, heavy and final. Vanessa preened, dabbing at a tear that wasn't there. "Oh, Mommy, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm so honored." Then my father turned to me, his eyes completely cold. "As for Alex," he said, his voice booming, "we think it's high time he learned to stand on his own 2 feet. He will receive the sum of $1. Not because we forgot him, but to show he was intentionally disinherited. Go earn your own, son." That's when the laughing started. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but something worse. A quiet, shared chuckle between the 3 of them, a private joke, and I was the punchline. My mother's shoulders shook with it. Vanessa covered her mouth, her eyes crinkling with amusement. My father just smirked. They looked at me, their failure, and they laughed. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. All the years of being hurt, of feeling invisible, of trying to earn affection they were never going to give, it all fused into a cold, hard resolve in my chest. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just met their mocking eyes with a calm expression I didn't even know I had. It still stung, of course, but the pain felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "Thank you for clarifying," I said, my voice perfectly steady. As I turned to leave, an old, stooped man who had been sitting quietly in the corner, the firm's senior partner, I realized, got up and met me at the door. He was frail, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He pressed a thick envelope into my hand. "From your grandfather," he whispered, his voice raspy. "He made me promise to give this to you personally, but only after they had their say." I looked down at the envelope. My name, Alex, was written on the front in my grandfather's familiar, shaky handwriting. A tremor went through me. My grandfather had died 2 years ago. I thought everything was already settled. Confused, I nodded my thanks and walked out of the office, the sound of my family's muffled laughter following me down the hall. I didn't look back. I just clutched the envelope, a lifeline I never expected. The city felt like an attack as I stepped out of the law firm's glass tower. The noise, the crowds, it was all too much. I just walked, no idea where I was going, the thick envelope a heavy weight in my pocket. I found a small park, a little patch of green squeezed between concrete buildings, and sat down on a bench. For a long time, I just held the envelope, my hands shaking. Part of me was terrified to open it. What if it was just another lecture, one last disappointment from the man I adored? My grandfather, Thomas, was my father's dad, but they were complete opposites. My father was obsessed with appearances, but my grandfather was kind and saw the world as full of possibilities. He was the one who taught me how to read the stars and taught me that my quiet nature was a strength, not a weakness. But in the last few years of his life, he'd grown distant. My calls went unanswered. My letters were ignored. My parents said he was getting old and reclusive, that he was angry I hadn't picked a career that made more money. They said he was disappointed in me. I believed them, and it hurt. With a deep breath, I broke the wax seal. Inside wasn't a long letter. It was a single, folded piece of paper and a heavy, old-fashioned brass key. I unfolded the note. His handwriting was shaky. "Alex, if you're reading this, it means they did what I was afraid of. Don't believe their version of the world. The truth is a stubborn thing, but sometimes you have to go find it. Go to the ranch. Your truth is there. This key opens my study. Trust your heart, son. It's always been your best compass. Love, Grandpa Thomas." The ranch. My breath caught in my throat. It was a sprawling property hours from the city, a place where I'd spent the best summers of my childhood. It was my grandfather's entire world. After he died, my parents quickly announced they were going to sell it, saying it was too much work and held too many painful memories. I hadn't been back since the funeral, a funeral they insisted was a small, private affair. The note was a puzzle, one last adventure he'd set up for me. A spark of hope, something I hadn't felt in years, ignited inside me. The humiliation from the lawyer's office started to fade, replaced by a powerful sense of purpose. I didn't go home. I went straight to the train station, bought a one-way ticket, and watched the city shrink behind me. The whole trip was a blur of memories. My grandfather teaching me how to mend a fence, his calloused hands guiding mine. Him telling me family stories that were so much richer and more complicated than the polished versions my parents told. When I finally got to the small town near the ranch, it was late afternoon. I took a cab the rest of the way, my heart hammering against my ribs. As we turned onto the long, dusty driveway, a wave of nostalgia hit me so hard it almost buckled my knees. But as we got closer, that feeling soured. The ranch looked neglected. The white fence was peeling. The flower beds my grandmother had loved were choked with weeds. The house itself seemed to be sagging, like it was tired. It was a physical symbol of what had happened to my relationship with this place and with my grandparents. I paid the driver and just stood there for a moment. This wasn't just a house. It was the heart of my grandfather's world. Seeing it like this felt like another betrayal. I walked up the creaking porch steps and slid the old brass key into the lock on his study door. It turned with a solid click. The door swung open, releasing the familiar smell of old books, pipe tobacco, and wood smoke. And there, sitting in my grandfather's worn leather armchair, was my grandmother, Helen. She looked up, startled. Her face, which I always remembered with a smile, was now etched with grief and bitterness. And when her eyes landed on me, they were cold. "Alex," she said, her voice flat, "what are you doing here? Come to pick over the bones before your parents sell the place." That coldness hit me like a slap. This was my Grandma Helen, the woman who baked me apple pies and called me her little scholar. Now she was looking at me like I was a stranger. "Grandma," I whispered. I got a letter from Grandpa." She scoffed, a harsh sound. "Thomas is gone, Alex. He can't protect you anymore." "Protect me from what?" "From your own selfishness," she said, standing up stiffly. "For 2 years we heard nothing. Not a call, not a letter. Your grandfather, he waited by the phone every single day, hoping you decall. He kept making excuses for you. 'The boy is busy,' he'd say, but I knew. Your parents told us everything." "What did they tell you?" I asked, my blood running cold. "That you were ashamed of us, ashamed of this old ranch, that you were too busy with your fancy city life for your simple country grandparents. They told us you couldn't wait for it to be sold so you could get your share." Every word was a lie, a carefully crafted, poison-tipped lie. Anger rose in me, hot and sharp, but I remembered my grandfather's letter. Trust your heart. Shouting wouldn't work. I had to be calm. "Grandma, that's not true," I said, keeping my voice steady. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely use it. I scrolled back through 2 years of my call history. "Look." I held the phone out to her. "This is the number I had for you and Grandpa. I called it hundreds of times, at least once a week. It just rang and rang." She squinted at the screen, her expression skeptical. Then her eyes widened. She walked over to the old phone on my grandfather's desk and read the number on a yellowed piece of paper taped next to it. Her face went pale. The number on my phone was different by a single digit. This isn't our number," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's the number Mom and Dad gave me," I said softly. "They told me you de-changed it and didn't want to be bothered." She sank back into the armchair. The coldness in her eyes was replaced by confusion, then a dawning horror. "The letters," she murmured. "You sent letters." "Dozens, birthday cards, Christmas cards. I never heard back." I thought for a moment. "I sent them to the P.O. box address Dad gave me." My grandmother's eyes shot up to meet mine, now filled with tears. "We closed our P.O. box 5 years ago, Alex. Mail comes right to the house now. Richard knew that. He handles the property taxes for us, or he was supposed to." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of deception so twisted it was hard to grasp. They hadn't just let us drift apart, they had systematically cut the connection. They isolated me from the only family who ever truly loved me, and they isolated my grandparents from their grandson. Then came the most painful question. "Grandpa's funeral," I said, my voice thick. "Why didn't you want me there? Dad said it was immediate family only. He gave me a day and time. I came, but I was a day late. The cemetery was empty. I thought I'd just gotten it wrong. I sat at his grave and talked to him for an hour, telling him how sorry I was." My grandmother was openly weeping now. "Oh, Alex," she cried, her voice breaking. "We wanted you there more than anything. We kept asking Richard where you were. He told us he'd called you, but that you said you were too busy with work to come. He said you'd pay your respects later." It broke your grandfather's heart. I think that's what finally made him give up. The cruelty of it was stunning. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. About erasing me from the family story so they could justify their greed. They had stolen my last goodbye. They had let my grandfather die believing I didn't care. My own tears started to fall then, hot tears of rage and grief. My grandmother came and wrapped her frail arms around me. We just stood there in the dusty study, 2 victims of the same lie, mourning the years and the love that had been stolen from us. After a while, she pulled away, her eyes now filled with fire. The grief had been burned away by anger. "Your grandfather knew," she said, her voice firm. "He suspected something was wrong. That's why he wrote that note. And that's not all he left." She walked over to a heavy oak bookshelf and pressed a hidden latch. A section of the shelves swung open, revealing a small wall safe. She spun the dial like she'd done it 100 times. "He told me the combination, and made me promise not to open it unless you came here, unless you proved you were still the boy he loved." The safe door clicked open. Inside was a large, sealed manila envelope. On the front, in my grandfather's hand, it said, "The real last will and testament of Thomas Miller." Beside it was a smaller envelope, marked simply for Alex. My grandmother handed them both to me. "Your parents think they've won," she said, her voice like steel. "They have no idea what's coming." The plan was my grandmother's, but I carried it out with a cold fury I didn't know I had. 2 days later, my parents and Vanessa arrived at the ranch. They thought they were meeting a real estate agent for a final walkthrough. My grandmother had called them, her voice trembling. They must have thought she was just a helpless old woman and asked them to be there. They pulled up in my father's gleaming luxury car, kicking up dust like they were conquering heroes. My father was already pointing out areas to develop. My mother was talking about landscaping, and Vanessa was taking selfies with the barn, probably with some stupid caption like country living. My grandmother and I were waiting on the porch. I was sitting in my grandfather's rocking chair with the envelopes in my lap. "Ah, Alex," my father said, barely looking at me. "Decided to show up. A little late to pretend you're interested, don't you think?" "I had to sort a few things out," I replied calmly. Vanessa drifted over, looking me up and down. "Don't worry, Alex," she cooed. "Once we sell this old place, maybe I'll give you a little something to help you out. No hard feelings, right?" "No hard feelings at all, Vanessa," I said. The look of shock on her face was priceless. We all went inside. The real estate agent, a man I'd already spoken to, was waiting. He started his pitch about market values, and my parents and Vanessa hung on every word, their greed so thick you could feel it. They started talking like my grandmother and I weren't even there. "We can subdivide the back 40 acres, my father said excitedly. "Build luxury homes." "Oh, darling, and we can gut this awful house and make it modern," my mother added. "Get rid of all this dusty old junk." That was my cue. "This dusty old junk is my husband's legacy," my grandmother said, her voice ringing out with sudden power. The room went silent. "And this land will not be sold, not 1 inch of it." My father laughed. "Mother, don't be sentimental. The will was clear. The trust is Vanessa's. And since I'm the executor of your estate, I get to decide what happens to the ranch." "Are you sure about that, Richard?" I asked, standing up. I held up the large manila envelope. "Because we seem to have found a more recent will, the real one, lodged with grandfather's original lawyer, the senior partner you ignored and authenticated this morning." The color drained from my father's face. My mother gasped. "What is this, a joke?" My father sputtered. "No joke," my grandmother said. "Thomas knew you. He knew your greed. He set up that phony trust with you and your cheap lawyer years ago to keep you happy. It was a decoy. His real assets, which are worth a lot more than 10 million, by the way, were always kept separate." I broke the seal on the envelope and started to read. The language was dense, but the point was brutally simple. The entirety of my grandfather's estate, the ranch, the stocks, the properties they didn't even know he owned, was left to me, Alex Miller. Vanessa let out a choked sob. My mother looked like she was going to faint. My father's face turned purple with rage. "This is fraud," he yelled. "I'll sue you." "You can try," I said calmly. "But I don't think you'll like what comes out in court. Things like fake phone numbers, stolen mail, the lies you told a dying man about his grandson." He staggered back, speechless. "But that's not all," I said, picking up the second envelope. "Grandpa also left this, a personal letter. He wanted it read aloud in front of everyone." I opened it. My voice was clear. "To my family," I began, reading my grandfather's words. "Richard, my son, I watched you grow from a bright boy into a man I don't recognize. You traded your integrity for status and your compassion for wealth. You taught your daughter, Vanessa, that entitlement is a virtue and kindness is a weakness. My greatest disappointment isn't what you've done, but what you've become." I glanced at my father. He was shaking. I kept reading. "Alina, you encouraged his worst instincts. You valued appearances over honesty, and you let a cruelty into your home that poisoned everything it touched." My mother let out a small, wounded gasp. "Vanessa, you had every advantage, yet you chose to just copy your parents' hollow values. I hope, one day, you learn that a person's worth isn't measured by what they're given, but by what they build." Vanessa was crying now, real, racking sobs of shame. Finally, I read the last part. My voice shook for the first time. And to Alex, my dear boy, I am sorry. I'm sorry I let them build a wall between us. I doubted you, and it is my deepest regret. But my heart always knew the truth. You are quiet, but you are strong. You are gentle, but you are not weak. You have an integrity that your father traded away long ago. This ranch, this legacy, isn't a gift, it's a responsibility. I'm not giving you wealth, I'm giving you roots. A place where your good heart can grow. Build something wonderful, be happy. Know that you were, and always will be, deeply loved. Silence, a heavy, profound silence filled the room. The truth was out. The lies were shattered. All the power they thought they had was gone. In the quiet that followed, my grandmother spoke, her voice leaving no room for argument. Richard, Eleanor, Vanessa, get out of my house, get off this land. Now. My father opened his mouth, but the fight was gone. He looked like a deflated balloon, old and small. My mother was in a state of shock. Without another word, the three of them turned and walked out, a shamed, silent procession. I watched them get into their fancy car and drive away, leaving a cloud of dust that settled slowly, like the final curtain falling on a long, painful play. The triumphant feeling I expected to have just wasn't there. Instead, there was just a vast, quiet peace, mixed with a deep sadness for the family I could have had. The victory wasn't in beating them. It was in the truth finally being set free. In the months that followed, I poured everything I had into the ranch. My grandmother and I worked side by side. We mended fences, repainted the house, and slowly brought her gardens back to life. With every weed we pulled, it felt like we weren't just fixing a property, but healing a wound. I used the resources my grandfather left me to bring his dream to life. I started the Thomas Miller Foundation, a nonprofit for sustainable farming. The ranch became its headquarters. We turned old barns into labs and classrooms and offered grants to young, aspiring farmers, kids who had passion but not a lot of support. The ranch, once a symbol of my loneliness, became a hub of community and hope. It was a place where things grew again. I found a new family there, built on shared passion, not just blood. My grandmother, free from the bitterness that had consumed her, thrived. She became the heart of the foundation. And that's where the story could have ended. But life is rarely that simple. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have confronted them? Walked away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. It really helps. About 5 years later, a car I didn't recognize pulled up the long driveway. A woman got out, looking nervous. It took me a second to realize it was Vanessa. She looked different. She wore simple jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. She told me she'd left our parents a few years ago, that she couldn't live with their toxic bitterness anymore. She had a simple job, was going to night school, and was trying to build a life on her own terms. She didn't ask for money. She didn't even ask to be forgiven. She just asked if she could volunteer in the gardens on weekends. She said she wanted to learn how to help something grow. I didn't offer easy forgiveness. You can't rebuild that kind of broken trust with just words. But I did say yes. I gave her a chance. The real inheritance my grandfather left me wasn't the money or the land. It was the freedom to break a toxic cycle. It was knowing my worth was never determined by the people who refused to see it. It was the chance to build a legacy of my own, one rooted in kindness, integrity, and the quiet power of helping things grow, both in the soil and in the human heart.